Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA here in Texas. Each week, I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and bring them on to have them share some of their story in hopes that it inspires and encourages you to tell some of yours. I couldn't be more thrilled this week to have my special guest, Lisa Marsh, on with us. Lisa, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Well, I met Todd. He hired me in Navasota and 5 years ago, and I have taught for this is my 20th year. I have been a classroom teacher for fourth grade, self-contained, fifth grade, self-contained, and then I moved into kindergarten and did that for my last classroom experiences. And then Todd was so nice to let me get out of the classroom and become the RTI coordinator in Navasota for one of the campuses there. And I continue to do that and love it.
Well, I am so thrilled that you agreed to come on and kind of chat with me a little bit today. Because it's been so great spending the last couple of years kind of getting to know you and some
Mhm.
of your story. And I love what you wrote in our book, Stories from Web. And so let's just kind of jump into some things. You said you've been in education for 20 years. When you were
Yes.
growing up, did you know you wanted to be a teacher?
No, I didn't. I really didn't. I in I was a struggling student, and I was not one of your A B students. If I got a C, it was like an A to me. I remember during fourth and fifth grade, even up into my junior high years, crying at the table with my dad trying to do the math. I mean, it was that hard. And so I was going to try to find an easy career to do that would make money. And my high school counselor for my senior year, I worked in her office, and she told me to go to psychology. She goes, "You love people and try psychology." So, of course, I didn't have the grades to go to for your colleges or anything. So I did the junior college route, and it's great. And I got my bachelor's in psychology. And I thought I would be just your high school, private counselor for kids or adults or anything. And I realized at that point that was not me.
Mhm.
But then I had this degree. So I was like, what do I do now? And so I had to make some money. I was still living at home, and I was like, what am I going to do? So I started subbing and fell in love with it. And I was like, well, maybe this is my opportunity, but how do I become a teacher in Texas? And so I found out, and I was like, well, I could go back to University of Houston and just go the certification route, but how am I going to
Mhm.
pay for my bills? So I made a proposition to my dad, and he took me up on it, and he paid my bills while I got done, because he kept telling me, "You're going to be a professional student." And so I guess I'll keep paying for it.
Yeah.
So I did it, and that's how I became a teacher. And I can't see anything else me doing.
Mhm. Well, I've loved getting kind of watch you grow because I did not know you as a fourth or fifth grade teacher, but to
Right,
watch you in kindergarten and then to watch you take over the reading intervention job and the RTI, and it's been so cool to see all the skill sets and all your strengths and how you choose to grow those. One of the things that we talk a lot about on this podcast series that me and
mhm,
my guests do is those hidden stories that people don't always know about each one of us. And that's what I loved about getting to write the book Stories from Web is when I was
exactly.
collecting different excerpts from people at our school, the amount that we
Right,
learned through that. And as the campus principal, sometimes I'm more privy to people's things they're going through and things like that because they can't come to work or they need me to cover their class so they can leave early or different things like that. And you
right.
had something really impactful happened in your life a couple
Mhm.
years ago that has really stuck with me that I remember you going through, and it was the loss of one of your parents. And so kind of talk to me about what that was like going through that while also being at school while trying to still be strong.
Right. my dad unexpectedly passed away 3 years ago. And I remember the phone call I got. Mom was trying to call me through the night. And of course, I didn't hear my cell phone ringing. It was on silent mode. And
Mhm.
I remember waking up and hearing her voice on that phone and saying that she was in a police car, but she was okay. And they were driving her to the hospital, and looking at my husband going, what do I do now? I mean, because they were
Yeah.
out of town. And I remember him telling me, you call Todd and you tell him you're not coming to work, and you pack your bags and we'll take you to the airport.
Mhm.
And so just going through the whole ordeal of that, unexpectedly having your dad in ICU in another state was just unreal.
Mhm.
And then having to come back home and go, okay, now what do I do with my
Mhm.
kids? They're kindergarten and they don't understand that.
Mhm.
And um, I didn't really want to bring up the death issue with them
Mhm.
because that's so hard,
Right.
for anyone. And I knew my emotions were so raw that I would start
Mhm.
crying in front of them. And I
Right.
really didn't want to do that. And so, luckily, when I was able to come back to work, it was on an in service day,
Mhm.
so that the teachers could give me I could answer their questions of what happened
Mhm.
and get their support before the kids ever arrived.
Well, I remember when all of this happened, and I remember
Mhm.
you letting me know. And then once you went to go see them, you were very much of a, I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to come back. I've got to deal with this and with that. And I had a lot of empathy towards you in losing both grandparents and different things like that. I
Mhm.
mean, I think everybody's experienced some kind of loss. But
Right.
about a year or so later, when I unexpectedly lost my mother,
Right.
I had a total different understanding of the things you went through because, when you lose a child or when you lose a parent, it's a total different loss than somebody else in your life.
It
And
is.
so, how did you work through that pain without letting it completely consume you?
Well, I didn't really deal with it until that summer. I
Mm,
just tried to push it back, push it back. I mean, I knew he died. I mean, I always knew it, but
mhm,
it was like a dream I was living.
right.
And really, I can't tell you, I probably was the worst teacher for those 6 or 7 months. I mean, I was probably the worst teacher that anyone could have had. Um, but I think also that the kids helped me through it
Mm,
because they knew I was gone for, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks,
mhm,
and they knew it wasn't good why
right.
I had left. I did finally have to kind of tell them in a 5-year-old way what happened
Mhm,
because they just wouldn't leave it alone. And I understood that. I mean, if I was a 5-year-old in a classroom and their teacher was just happened to be gone for, several weeks, I would be having questions too. But I think they helped me kind of get my mind off of it.
mhm,
And for that 8 hours that I was with
right.
them each day.
Well, something that I have found that's pretty unique to a really personal loss, and I want to get your thoughts on this is,
Hmm.
when you lose somebody close to you, people rally around you usually, and they comfort
Yeah.
you and they try to be there and they try to be present and they express their condolences and all these kind of things. And
Right.
as time progresses, for the person dealing with the loss, the pain doesn't necessarily go away, it just becomes
No,
different.
it doesn't.
But do you find yourself sometimes feeling like everybody's forgotten about him except for me? And
Yes.
I'm the only one sitting here remembering him, and why does nobody else care anymore? Because, I think about my mom and
Hmm.
I'm like, for me, it's still a personal daily struggle. There's moments or there's smells or experiences, and then I sit there and go, am I the only one even thinking about her? Because nobody ever talks about her or
Exactly.
anything else. So, do you find yourself kind of having that hit you sometimes too?
I do. I think in my situation, it helps a little bit with having my son
Mhm.
because I want to keep those memories for him that he
Mhm.
has alive.
Yeah.
And I really don't know if he actually remembers the memories or us
Mhm.
talking about it. But
Yeah.
he was such a big part of my dad's life. I mean, my
Mhm.
son was named after him,
Oh,
with his middle name. And so I want to keep those memories alive as much as I can for
mhm,
him. And I know it was a great loss for him too,
mhm.
because they were the best buds. I mean,
Right.
if my dad could have lived longer, they would have just done everything together.
Mhm.
So in that regards, I do. And then there's times I'm grieving,
Mhm.
and people don't understand that
Mhm.
when it's 3 years later and you're having a really bad day. And it's not because of work. It's not because of,
Mhm.
what's going on at home. You're just wishing you could pick up the phone call and call
Mhm.
and hear his advice about something or tell
Mhm.
him something funny that happened, But I think until you go through something like this, losing a mom or a dad or a stepdad or, someone very close to you that raised you, you don't
Mhm.
understand it.
Right. And I think it's exactly like what you said. Like there are those days where the grief just hits you and it just feels a little bit
Yeah.
overwhelming. And because I remember about a year and a half after she passed, somebody I had heard made the comment of, "Isn't he over it yet?" And I was like, "Well, I do have some really good days, and I do have days, and there are
Exactly.
times where I can have her memory and I laugh at things, or I can smile about things, and that took me a while to get to that point. But there are some days where you're
Right.
like, that's the only person I want to talk to today. Like I'm upset right now
Hmm.
because it's literally the only person I wish I could tell this to, and they're not there. And I don't have anybody, and I
Right.
don't want to sit here and tell everybody about it because I don't want to be complaining. But
Exactly. Exactly. And I feel that way too with my dad. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm making a big decision career wise. And it's like every time I think about it, I want to pick up the phone
Mhm.
and say, "Hey, Dad, you've helped me so much so far with my career
Yeah.
and my decisions, but, you know, I can't." So it's hard.
So if there's somebody listening right now who recently went through a really painful experience similar,
Hmm.
or is dealing with grief, what would be one of the one things you really want them to know?
I would, I would strongly suggest them to find somebody they can talk to.
Mhm.
I know for me, I had a couple of close coworkers that would, in their own little way, come and check on me. They wouldn't
Mhm.
ask me, "Well, how are you doing about your dad? How are you doing that?" They would just come and say, "How is today?"
Mhm.
And that really helped me because if I wanted to talk about it, I could. But
Yeah.
if I could just say, "Hey, I'm okay," I'm making it,
Right.
and they left it at that. They didn't. So I had those people around me that I could just either pick up the phone or tell them at work, "Hey, I'm really struggling. Don't come to my room
Right.
today because I'll just fall to pieces." And so I
Right.
think and so I think you need those people. I'm not saying a lot of people, but just
Mhm.
one or two people that you can just go to and just fall apart,
I
and they
think
can they can help you.
that's excellent advice, and I would completely agree with what you just said. And another thing I want to ask you about, you have a really personal experience with dealing
Mhm.
with um, different people in your life who are struggling with mental
Mhm.
health issues,
Mhm.
and mental health. It's become a more of a topic lately that people are more comfortable
Yes.
talking with, but for many years, and not only in our country's history but in families and cultures, mental
Mhm.
health isn't talked about. It's hidden under the rug. It is kept to the side. It's looked as a terrible thing, or these
Mhm.
people are terrible things because they just can't fix it themselves or anything like that.
Right.
Now that you live your life knowing there's
Mhm.
people in your life who are dealing with mental health issues, whether that is, I mean, there's all kinds of things, like we have kids with oppositional defiance or bipolar,
Right.
or dealing with depression or any of that. How do you how do you handle knowing that somebody you love has been diagnosed with something that at times not only is difficult for them, but can be difficult for you to handle?
I married into a situation that has mental illness into it. And so I've dealt with it for 20 years. And I know, I would say for the first 10 years, if it was brought up that I knew somebody very close to me that had mental illness,
Mhm.
they would look at me like I was strange. That,
Mhm.
oh, don't, you might catch it from her, or
Right.
they weren't understanding about it. They would quickly change the subject. And to me, it needs to be brought out. People need to talk about it more. And I would say just in the last 5 years, I can bring it up and people will say, oh, yeah, I know what you're going through. I
Mhm.
have, a brother, or my wife does it, have that same illness. And a lot of times with mental illness, it can't be controlled,
Mhm.
and it's not the person's actions that are causing it, and
Right.
it's a lot of it, it's the chemicals in your brain that are
Mhm.
just not synced right. And a lot of it they can't control.
Yeah.
And so I mean, if you follow me on Facebook, there's at least one or two posts I post about mental illness, because
Mhm.
that's my way of being that advocate, because so
Right.
many times doctors and health professionals don't listen to them.
Mhm.
And I've learned with my experience is that if you are dealing with somebody that does have a mental illness, you need to go with them to the doctors,
Right.
because a lot of these doctors do not listen to the patient. And if they're not listening to the patient, then the patient is never going to get well or stable.
Well, one thing that I really learned in the conversations that I've had with you and things
Hmm.
is that, when you have people who are dealing with these mental health issues and then they find a medication that works or they find a
Hmm.
therapy that works, it doesn't always work. It may work for 6 months or a year, and then all of a sudden their body chemistry has changed and that is no longer working for them. And so I
Exactly.
know there's been experiences even in your own life with that you've seen that it's like, oh, well, that was working for this person for this long, but it's not working anymore. And do you get to that point where you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm so emotionally drained that why can't we just find what it is? And how do you keep up the compassion towards the people that you're like, I know this isn't you. I know that this is a imbalance or anything like
Right.
that, and that we're gonna work through that. How do you not give up?
Well, I can tell you, prime example was this summer. Um, the family member who has the mental illness, the doctor told us there was nothing else. There was no more medications. We've tried them all. We could try them all again, and it really hurt us. I mean, it
Mhm.
was just like, why keep going,
Yeah.
And so, with my psychology background, I can start surfing the internet, and I did, days on end, trying to find something else we could do. And it's hard when you get that news,
Mhm.
that this medication has stopped, and what can we do next? It's very hard for the caregiver, because you can see the patient just lose so much hope.
Right.
And I think with caregivers, with somebody with mental illness, they have to have their own little support group beyond the family,
Right.
that understands it. And I know I've always had one or two people that are very close to me, since I am one of the caregivers, that I can just call day and night and say, hey, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do. And they always will just sit there and listen and not really give me advice, but
Yeah.
they just know, okay, she just needs to let it all out. And it is hard. It is very hard to keep the compassion, but if you love the person that has a
Mhm.
mental illness, you see past it. And
Right.
I've learned to see what the person is really like, and I don't see the mental illness when I look at that person.
Well, one thing that you said there that really stuck out to me was that one thing that is really beneficial for you, and I find for me as well, is that when you have those people you can go to, that they're good
Mhm.
listeners. They're not
Yes.
looking to solve your problem. They're not looking to give you the answer or anything like that. They just listen Because I know
Yeah,
sometimes, like, when you're dealing with all that emotion, you're like, I just want to know that somebody hears me and can understand, and
exactly.
they don't have to say a word at all. Just tell me that you hear me. Like, that's it.
Exactly. And the problem is so many people have advice to give to me
Hmm.
and give to the person that has the illness, and they don't know what they're talking about. And it
Hmm.
only just makes more frustration for the people that are actually dealing with it. And a lot of times we just need somebody to listen to us.
Yep. Well, you're in a profession that you are constantly giving yourself, not only to other
Hmm.
educators, but also to kids. And, you're giving yourself in other areas of your life and your personal life as well. How do you maintain a balance and sanity? Like, what do you do to not let you be completely depleted?
I think the one thing that always gets me through everything is my faith.
Mm,
And I pray daily for it,
mhm,
and I really think if I didn't have my strong faith, I would never get through the death of my father,
right,
or dealing with mental illness every day, or dealing with stuff at work,
mm,
And I think one thing that also helps me is when I read books.
mhm.
That's my little escape and become a character in that book. And
Yep.
so reading does really help me. And for quite a few years I wasn't reading, and I noticed last year I got back on the bandwagon of, okay, I need to read at something every day. And it has really helped me because of the fact I just escape then.
Mhm. I love that. Well, Lisa, a question I always love to end these conversations on is, we talked about a lot in a short amount of time. We talked about,
Right.
just pursuing a career that wasn't on your mindset at the beginning, dealing with the loss of a loved one, dealing with people close in your life who have mental health issues.
Hmm.
If there was one thing that you wish more people knew or understood about anything at all, what would be your
Hmm.
one thing that you wish more people knew or understood?
Uh, the one thing is mental illness. I just
Mm,
think it's one of those issues, and it's so dear to my heart that people just don't want to learn and
mhm,
understand it. It's amazing to me how many people I come across in life that don't even know anything about it,
right.
and or scared about it. Like, you can catch it. You can't catch it. I mean, it's not like you can touch somebody and then, oh, you got it. But people think that. And I think that I look at other countries and how they deal with mental illness, and it's so open. And we here in the United States are just so closed minded about it. And I think that causes a lot of problems in families, is just the openness of dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, I so much admire you and was just thrilled when I was able to convince you to come
Yeah.
on and have this chat with me. But your vulnerability and honesty is just incredibly moving. And I know that this conversation is going to speak to some people who really need to hear it. And I just loved
Right.
my time that I got to work with you. I loved so much that you wrote something for the book. You are just brilliant. So thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on tonight.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. And I'm glad I did it.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out all the past episodes wherever you get your podcast: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever, it's there. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope this conversation has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.